Welcome to our first edition of the Party Line, video edition that is, where we're going to spend time talking with Hoosier leaders who really know the issues in depth. And today we're just very thankful to have Tony Bennett, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, with us. And so Tony, we'll just first want to thank you for being here, and we'll just dive right into the deep end. And a lot of people are talking about all the work that you and the governor and the legislature accomplished this past session, but can you talk a little bit about what has taken us from maybe middle of the pack to the front of the line in terms of education reform?
Well, first, Eric, there's no question that Indiana, by every measure, is now the nation's leader in education reform. The legislative agenda that Governor Daniels, in my opinion, really championed and made possible, along with the leadership of Brian Bosma and David Long, I think there's no question that the national experts say that Indiana leapfrogged literally ahead of every other state in the country in one legislative session. And really what we accomplished was setting up what I think we all believe as Republicans to be the cornerstones of great systems, and that is providing competition, freedom, and accountability into an education system that really lacked it for many, many years. We set up an opportunity for parents to have more options through House Enrolled Act 1002, our expanded charter bill, House Enrolled Act 1003, our voucher bill, the nation's most expansive voucher program. We set up the competition portion of our platform. And then we said, well, you know, it's one thing to have options, and it's one thing to set up those alternative pathways for parents and families, but we have to allow public education to have the flexibilities to meet this competition and to meet the high levels of accountability that we're inserting into the system. So we passed Senate Enrolled Act 1, the Teacher and Principal Accountability Bill.
Sure.
That really requires school corporations to annually evaluate teachers and principals based significantly on student performance and ending an archaic process of making HR decisions based on seniority, setting up competitive performance-based compensation models. And then we also provided great school leaders flexibility in Senate Enrolled Act 575, which was collective bargaining reform, where we took collective bargaining, took out the language that said if Eric Holcomb and Tony Bennett are hired in a school corporation at the same time and they have to downsize, that we choose who gets to teach our children by adding up the last 4 digits of our Social Security number, and the person with the highest sum wins. So we limited collective bargaining to wages and wage-related fringe benefits, and by doing those 4 things, Eric, we really did put Indiana children first and set a structure in place so that schools can be built around the needs of Indiana's children.
Yeah, just an incredible amount accomplished in a relatively short period of time. You know, we like to see ourselves as the party of purpose or the party of ideas, and we like to take issues on head on. With that comes a lot of misinformation, as you all experienced in the State House and those limestone walls. Can you talk a little bit about some of the misinformation, rather, and what's the real deal with the new funding formula?
Well, first of all, the new funding formula, Eric, is really a huge leap forward in taking Indiana's fiscal policy decisions and marrying those to Indiana's education policy decisions. Mm-hmm. And you've been around this business long enough to know we've never done that very well. We've constantly heard the mantra, we need more money for education. Mm-hmm. And in 2011, our General Assembly said, no, let's figure out a way to get more education for our money. Mm-hmm. So we went to a money follows the child perspective. And what that means is that as students come and go from Indiana schools each year, that those schools will get the money or lose the money that those children would bring with them. And that is a big issue, Eric. We stopped funding things like the de-ghoster, which is really paying for children who don't exist in Indiana schools. We really got to the basic idea that we must begin the thought of funding excellence and begin the practice of funding excellence. The misinformation was huge. Yeah. And you know what? It's easy to spread misinformation if you're totally against things. And what we learned in this is the Republican House of Representatives, the Republican Senate, with the incredible leadership of our governor, we were for things. And we went right to the masses and said, this is what we're for. And we didn't get many counter proposals. We just got, this is what we're against. So having to combat the misinformation and kind of the obstructionist perspective were probably the two most difficult things in our session.
Are you still experiencing that misinformation with the quote-unquote school takeover issue?
School takeover issue, yes. There's no question. Because people equate any type of state intervention on our lowest performing schools to be a takeover. And under Public Law 221, school takeover or putting a turnaround school operator in a school is one of 5 potential options.
Right.
And within those options, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility. So when we take a look at the issue of potentially taking over Indiana's failing schools, we will probably only take over the worst of the worst. The folks who have really been trying to incorporate transformational change and who have gotten some results, we want to help them continue to move down that path. Because, Eric, as Republicans, we believe local control is the best policy.
Right.
But local control can never be an excuse for local failure of our children. And that's where we have to take a hard line and say, if local school corporations are not going to do what's best for Indiana children, the state has to come in and find a way to do it for them.
Well, I assume you're hearing about this. You know, one thing people know about Tony Bennett is you are a traveler, a perpetual traveler of the state. You meet with lots of teachers. I don't know how many you've met with recently, but do you plan on continuing that practice, and what are you hearing on the road?
Well, Eric, as actually we're taping this, tonight we will do our 17th of 18 public hearings regarding Indiana's chronically failing schools. Prior to this, during the legislative session, I personally went to gymnasiums, cafeterias, auditoriums, and met with over 8,000 teachers. And, you know, they all weren't positive. They all didn't love what we were going to say. But we went and we looked them in the eye and said, this is what we're for. What are you for? Give us good ideas. And oddly enough, Eric, contrary to what a lot of people might think, many of our great educators across the state gave us good ideas. And those ideas found their way into many of the amendments during the legislative process. But we will continue to reach out. We will continue to listen. We will continue to take good notes. And we're going to continue to serve Indiana's education as Indiana's education serves Indiana's children.
Based on your experience so far as the superintendent of public instruction here in Indiana, what kind of advice would you give your cohorts around the country that are now talking about these issues that you hit head on?
Stop talking and start doing. You know, we have a governor in this state that has 6.5 years of doing things. And I think the fact that Indiana in 2011 incorporated the nation's most ambitious education reform agenda, and at the same time increased funding to K-12 education, finished the full-day kindergarten grant, set up grants to recognize and reward Indiana's great teachers, is a huge accomplishment. And I think that happens when people do things. So my suggestion is be aggressive, don't blink, meet your opponents face to face, and never stop doing, because our children and their futures are at stake. And we have to look at it that way. The clock is ticking, and we can't allow the rest of the nation and the rest of the world to get ahead of us. And that'd be my suggestion to the other state, because you know what? If they do that, we're going to move even quicker.
Right. Well, we're going to end this with a few questions about you personally, and we'll ask following guests the same questions. But what's something that drew you to the Republican Party, or what makes you a Republican?
Erica, I think you know this. I am the only Republican in the Bennett family. My dad is a lifetime Clark County Democrat. My mom's a New England Kennedy Democrat. My sister is probably the most deeply rooted Democrat in our family, and my grandmother on my dad's side would have never voted for me because she never voted for anything but straight ticket. But I think it is really the branding that Governor Daniels gave our party. I was a Republican before Governor Daniels ran for governor, but it was really during my first presidential election. Ronald Reagan was running, and it was the idea that, you know, government should get out of the way, and we should have It's a strong national defense. And you know what? Every tax dollar we charge, we're taking a freedom away from people. And those principles really attracted me to the Republican Party as a very young man. And I think educationally, Eric, it's the fact that the Republican Party stands for reform. And so this experience, watching education over the last 25 years, watching the erosion of the A-plus program, solidified my position that I believe being a Republican in this time in our history is really the right place to be.
I've had the privilege of being in your office, so I might have an idea about this, but who is someone that you admire, politically or not, or that you look up to?
Well, you know, I first of all love American presidents. And my favorite American president is Teddy Roosevelt. I think you know that. My dog is actually named Teddy. But you know, Eric, our staff always laughs because I have also my other American hero is George Patton. And so many of the superintendents who walk into my office and see the George Patton picture and the big portrait of Teddy Roosevelt that was painted by a student down in Evansville, they often say that's kind of pretty indicative of the way the Department of Education runs.
Yeah, just couple shy guys. What's in closing? What's a fun fact about you that people might not know? A hobby or a good movie that you've seen, or a vacation that you really enjoyed?
Well, first, Eric, I think a lot of people wouldn't know that I'm the father of triplets, and then an extra child that we refer to as Lizzie. I mean, poor Lizzie's always had this thing hanging over her head that she's the triplet sister. But I would say the most fun fact is the fact that I probably 6 to 10 times a year watch the movie Patton, including every Christmas Eve. You know, some people watch A Christmas Carol. I watch Patton.
Big American flag to start it off right. Well, thank you, Tony, for being here today, and thank Indiana is appreciative of your courage and your passion and your focus, and most importantly, our kids, the students, are going to benefit from your hard work. And thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.